Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. It's the licensing process part 3, which is developing a successful plan of correction. My name is Michelle Strouser, and with me today is Dale Crow and John Kimberland.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The webinar will be approximately 1 hour with about a half hour at the end for questions. Everyone attending the webinar is automatically muted. Questions can be asked during the session, but they will have to be typed into your screen. In order to send a question, you go to the question pane of the control panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, and use the 2 drop-down menu and select either all organizers only, or presenter only. And then you can enter the question in the provided field and click send. The message will appear in the recipient's question pane. During today's webinar, we only plan to address questions relating to the topic today because we want to keep this all about developing plans of correction. It will be recorded and put on our website. Therefore, we would like to keep it purely about plans of correction development. And any other questions can be directed to the operator support hotline at 866-503-3926 or the regional office. And I'll give that phone number again later in the PowerPoint.
I should add that for those participants who have logged in and will stay logged in for the entire webinar, which will be 1.5 hours, you will get 1.5 CEUs towards your PCH administrator credits. If you can't attend today, then you would be able to, as Michelle said, you'll be able to look the webinar up at a later point on our website.
Okay, today we have 2 handouts, and one is the PowerPoint that we're using for the webinar, and the other one is an example of a licensing inspection summary page, which we'll be looking at later. They're both available in the options menu. If you open the options menu and then click on the plus sign next to the word handouts, a box containing the handouts will appear and you can access them there. As I said, my name is Michelle Strouser. I am the Director of Professional Development for the Bureau of Human Services Licensing. Dale Crow is here as well, and he is the hotline manager. I know many of you have spoken with him before. And our guest speaker today is John Kimberland, who is a Human Services Licensing Supervisor in the Western region for Bureau of Human Services Licensing. He has at least 10 years of experience with the program and looks at plans of correction on a daily basis. So I believe he is an expert on developing a successful plan of correction. So today's topic of developing a successful plan of correction was selected because we want to help you understand how to write a good plan of correction that will not only correct any violations you may have had, but also keep the violation from occurring again. The general outline for today, we're going to cover the legal requirements for a plan of correction, steps to a successful plan of correction, the plan of correction process and how it relates to quality assurance, and the plan of correction verification process, which is done on our end at the department. The next topics, which we plan to cover, will be scheduled for early in 2018, and the first one should be on reportable incidents, which will include reporting requirements and best practices. And we also plan to cover infection control, which we plan to do in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Department of Health and OSHA. The next webinars aren't scheduled yet, so keep an eye on your email if you're on the listserv. We do plan to announce all of our trainings and webinars on the listserv, which we've been doing. If you're not a member of the listserv, it would be a good idea to join. or keep an eye on our What's New section of our website. And in order to find that, I have the link on the screen here to our website. And if you click there, have our website. Scroll down. We have a What's New section right here on our website, right in the middle of the page. And here we announce any trainings that we have coming up. So as you can see here today, today's webinar was announced on the What's New section. We also announced it on the listserv, which you can join by using this link. Just join listserv to receive email updates, and then just follow the simple instructions to add your email address. In order to find the previous recorded webinars, they are also linked to our web page. If you scroll down under general information, the last bullet, general training information, click on that. And then as you can see here, the last one, the last bullet is webinars. And here are the last 3 webinars that we had. So if they are actually on YouTube, you would just need to click on the link, and then it'll take you to YouTube, and you can watch the recorded webinar. This mouse is fast. Okay. So now I'm going to turn the webinar over to John Kimberland to start going over the plan of correction process.
Thank you, Michelle. One of the things I thought was very important as part of this training was to review the requirements for plan of correction so all of the providers understood where it comes from and what their legal responsibilities are. If you remember, for our providers that have gone through our administrator orientation program, we cover this section under Chapter 20. If you were in your administrator orientation program, there was a small yellow book that covered this. Chapter 20 is one of our laws and regulations that we have to follow. And under Chapter 20, Section 52, the plan of correction states if you have an inspection and we find a violation and it is cited, the home is required to submit an acceptable plan of correction for each item that is cited. And it also has to be corrected within a specific time period. Also, under Chapter 20, under 2071, when we look at our license, the license is issued to providers, which is their property. And part of this plan of correction process, starting with finding a violation, notifying the home of the violation in our exit conference, and going through with the written documentation to send the violation report out, part of that is your due process. With that, there are conditions that we can deny, non-renew, or revoke a license. If you look under 2071, under Chapter 20, the first section of that says under A1, failure to comply with this chapter. So if you fail to submit a plan of correction for each violation that is cited, a licensing action can happen. Item 2 is non-compliance with the licensing program approval. 3 you'll see is failure to submit an acceptable plan of correction. Number 4 will be failure to comply with the acceptable plan of correction. So when developing a plan of correction, you want to make sure that you're not putting things in a plan of correction just to satisfy the department. You want to put things in a plan of correction that you can meet. You don't want to put goals in there that you're unable to meet, such as the administrator is going to check something daily. Well, if the administrator is not there every day, that's not going to happen. So you don't want to back yourself into conditions that you can't meet. Okay? If you go through this a little bit more, it goes about abuse of clients, gross incompetence, negligence, and number 7 here is fraud and deceit in obtaining a license. When you're submitting or providing documents to the department, You have to make sure that the documents are true and accurate. If you are submitting documents that are inaccurate, from the get-go, meaning that if a document is inaccurate by human error, that's fine. If you are changing a document or altering a document and giving it to the department, that can be considered fraud and deceit in obtaining a license. You should not do that at any time. Okay. Moving forward, during the inspection process, when an inspection is conducted, the licensing representatives should present to you the regulatory violation that is potentially going to be cited. Many of the inspectors will do that as soon as they find an issue. They may have questions about it to make sure that we're measuring compliance with the regulation. We may not be able to fully measure compliance by documentation or information provided to us. If that is the case, we should notify the provider that it is a potential violation. Additionally, when we get to the point of an exit conference, many times licensing representatives will have a pre-exit conference, and they will get together and talk amongst themselves concerning the potential violations. There's an opportunity for them to determine that regulatory compliance has been met or has not been met, and what the specifics of that are. It also ensures that we have all the correct information from the home. At that point, we will start an exit conference with the providers of the home, whether it be a single administrator or a group of people. Sometimes there's many department heads or regional people that attend those conferences, which we certainly appreciate. The more people that we can communicate with, the better off it is. At that point, the licensing representatives will go through a list of potential violations, whether it be 1, 10, or however many there are. So at that time, it is an opportunity for the home to ask for assistance with how to correct the potential violations. We have an advantage being licensing representatives and supervisors of being in the field and being in many different homes. We have seen what works in some homes and what doesn't work in other homes. We can certainly offer suggestions to your home that may or may not work for your specific home, but there's some ideas to help you to come back into compliance and maintain compliance with any potential regulatory violations. It also gives the provider an opportunity to ask questions concerning the regulatory violation or potential regulatory violation, to understand why the violation is being cited. We have our regulatory compliance guide, and we actually have 500 regulations. With every single home that we have, there's over 1,400 homes. Even though the same violation may be cited, the same circumstances do not always exist. However, it does fit under that regulatory section. So it's good to ask why the violation is being cited or potentially being cited, and to give you a better understanding. If you do not understand why the regulation is being cited, then how are you expected to correct the violation and continue to be in compliance with the regulations? You also have an opportunity at that exit conference, and there's going to be some overlap in some of these slides, to dispute a regulatory violation. So if you do not believe that it is a regulatory violation, ask the licensing representatives to explain further. I personally like to show the providers the regulation in the book when I'm presenting violations. And if you believe that something is potentially going to be cited as a regulatory violation that you disagree with, I highly recommend that you call the supervisor of the lead licensing representative. During that exit conference, the lead licensing representative should give you the name and phone number of their supervisor. When that happens, take that information down. If you disagree with a regulatory violation, I would recommend calling the supervisor. I personally have had providers call me when licensing representatives are walking out of the building. And my reply is, I have no idea what you're talking about because I wasn't there. However, I will take your information, and when the document of the licensing inspection summary gets to me, I will call you back. 3 things will happen If you disagree with the violation, call that supervisor. One, you will explain your compliance with that regulation, and it, in fact, may not be a violation. Two, it will be a violation of the regulation. However, the supervisor will explain why it is a violation of the regulation. Or three, there could be a regulatory violation. However, it is under a different regulation number than what the licensing representatives presented. So one of those three things will happen at that time. I personally have done all three things. The more communication providers have with the licensing staff, whether it be the licensing representatives or the licensing supervisors, the better off we all are to have an understanding of the regulations and how to be in compliance with them. So that is very important. We as a department don't want providers out there wondering or having questions. That's why we have the operator support hotline. You can always access the supervisors in the office. It's always best if you have questions or concerns, even if it's not related to a potential regulatory violation, to call the office and ask your regional office and ask for one of the supervisors, because they're there more frequently than the licensing representatives. So, at that point, after the exit conference, after the inspection, if you're being cited for any licensing violations or regulatory violations, you will receive a letter from the department. Okay, the letter will give you, and it's very important to read all of the letters that are sent from the department to you. It is a legal notification to you. Some homes don't read the letters. You should read the letters in detail and read all the information. If you don't understand it, once again, you should see a supervisor's name at the bottom, and you can certainly contact the regional office and talk to that supervisor if you need clarification with any information. One of the things that is required is that you submit a plan of correction, and it always has to be an acceptable plan of correction. We'll go into detail into that a little bit later. The information that must be in that plan of correction should be in there. It will also ask you to send supporting documentation to verify compliance of any regulatory violation. That could be in the form of documents that have been updated or corrected. That could be in the form of pictures being sent in. Any type of those things. It could be receipts for purchasing items. It could be a third-party contractor that came in that did some work and the receipt from that. So there's a whole bunch of different things. If you have a question on what you should submit with your plan of correction, you can always call and ask that supervisor who's managing your licensing inspection. Okay. Once again, it'll also give you the information of the supervisor at the bottom of the page and who to contact if you need assistance or have any questions. We did talk about what to do if you believe a violation is incorrect. Once again, address it certainly in the exit conference with the licensing representatives. They will make a notation on their comment sheets that you disagree or dispute that violation, and it's perfectly okay to do that. We certainly do not want to issue a licensing inspection summary or violation report with a violation that is inaccurate. So, once again, the next couple slides go over the letter in specifics. Once again, the letter is a legal document that we're sending you, giving you notification. It's part of our due process. It will give the date of the inspection and say that the license inspection summary is enclosed, which is also the violation report. It requires you to submit an acceptable plan of correction. And the one thing to remember is when the licensing representatives go over potential regulatory violations, I highly recommend a home starts corrective action immediately with those potential regulatory violations. It will save you a lot of time and effort in the long run if you start correcting those things immediately and putting systems in place to make sure that they are maintained in a compliance manner. If you do not submit an acceptable plan of correction, we will send you a letter that says it is unacceptable. However, typically we try and call the home to work things out before sending a letter out. Likewise, if you do not submit a plan of correction, you will get a letter that says that it is overdue and is due immediately. Going through the letter some more, It says you must submit an acceptable plan of correction, and it must immediately correct the specific issue cited. It must include ongoing step-by-step plan to assure compliance is continued. What specific changes are made? Who will make the changes? When the change will be made? How will a change be made? What systems are in place to implement the changes to ensure the violation doesn't occur again? And what training is provided to staff? And once again, to submit any supporting documentation. It will also ask you to sign and date each violation report page. Going over some of those items, when we talk about who will make changes in a plan of correction, please do not put any names or indicate he or she in a plan of correction. We will need to redact that information. It's always best to use resident numbers, staff person letters, or titles of staff people, such as administrator, administrator designee, a designated staff person. Those things are all very important. Even if you have a third-party person, you do not want to put their names in a plan of correction, as well as anyone else's, including the licensing inspectors or this licensing inspector supervisor, because once again, that information will have to be redacted by us when we receive the document. When we look at training for staff in a plan of correction when you're developing it, typically homes do not sit down and go over all 500 regulations with their direct care staff. When something becomes a regulatory violation, one of the steps to prevent it from becoming a repeated violation or from the violation occurring again is to educate the staff regarding not only that regulation, but why that regulation is important. And we will go through some of those a little bit later. Also, when you sign and date each page in the licensing inspection summary, at the very end of the licensing inspection summary, if there were any residents or staff indicated in any of the violations, there will be a privacy coding document. And that could be the last two pages of that entire document. Those documents are in landscape form. At the very bottom of those documents, there is spaces there for you to sign and print your names. It is very important to do that, as well as the regular pages for the licensing inspection summary or violation report. One thing to remember is we provide you, there are several sections to that licensing inspection summary. Section 3 is for you to write your plan of correction in.
Okay,
Please
John,
do not write in any of the other sections except for the plan of correction section number 3 and or the section where you print and sign your name and indicate the date that you're completing the plan of correction.
Okay, I'm clicking over to the example of the licensing inspection summary page that John's referring to.
Okay, so with that licensing inspection page, the first thing that you will see is the regulation itself in Section 1. Section 2 will indicate the specific regulatory violation that has been found. Section 3 is an area for you to write your plan of correction in. Now, we have some providers that will handwrite their plan of correction. Other providers will type their plan of correction and actually cut the piece of paper out and tape it onto that page and copy it and fax it to us or send it to us. There is an option that many providers now use, is to type their plan of correction on a separate page. If you decide to do that, leave Section 3 completely blank. However, you will need to sign and date each page of the formal license inspection summary. If you are going to add a separate page, or if there is not enough room to write in that Section 3 to complete your entire plan of correction, once again, we want to have an acceptable plan of correction. A plan of correction typically means more than one thing written in there. So if the violation or the regulation itself is a lengthy one, or there are numerous violations listed, that Section 3 kind of shrinks down a little bit. So If there's not enough room to write in there in that section 3, or you choose to type it on a separate page, I recommend that on the upper left-hand corner of that page, you indicate the regulation number, okay? And then you can type out your entire plan of correction. Do not number the pages. The licensing supervisor will take care of that when it comes back. But it is key and it's very important that you sign and print your name and date each licensing inspection page, as well as sign and date any additional pages that you've added. So if you're typing your plan of correction or handwriting it on a separate page, those pages need to be signed and dated as well. The bottom section of the licensing inspection summary is for the supervisor to determine the compliance that it is at and sign it and date it as well. Please do not write in that section. Okay. In a plan of correction, you may disagree with a regulatory violation, and it is okay for you to indicate that in your plan of correction. I would recommend that if you disagree with that, with the violation, once again, that you don't wait until you get that licensing inspection summary, that you contact that supervisor to go over it and maybe give you a better understanding, or if it is truly not a violation, that won't even show up in your licensing inspection summary. You may, and we have several homes that do this as well, document that it doesn't constitute an admission of the regulatory violation, and that is fine as well. You have to submit that plan of correction for each of the regulatory violations as cited. So, in other words, if we had a physical site violation for Regulation 2695 for furniture and equipment, and there were multiple items addressed as a regulatory violation, each one of those items will need to be addressed in a plan of correction, that it was corrected or however your home managed that certain situation. In your plan of correction, if you write a statement that you're applying for a waiver, you can certainly do that. However, that is not an all-encompassing acceptable plan of correction, and homes are required to be in compliance with the regulations at all times. So until a waiver is issued from our headquarters office, then you still have to be in compliance with that regulation. So it is okay to indicate that you're doing that in your plan of correction. However, you will need to show steps coming into compliance immediately until a waiver is either approved or disapproved from our headquarters office. So now we're going to move on, and Michelle, I'm on slide 12. Reviewing the benefits of the regulation and understanding why the regulation was written in the first place is very important. For instance, if we look at Regulation 2600-101J7, which relates to bedside lighting, most staff do not understand, direct care staff do not understand why that's such an important regulation. We see that cited frequently. The importance of that regulation, it goes down to, residents, the number one injurer and killer of elderly are falls. When a resident gets up to use the restroom at night, turning that light on can prevent that fall from occurring. So it goes all the way back to a simple light that can be turned on or off can actually mean life and death for some of our residents. And unfortunately, we do see that happen. You want to determine the root cause of the violation. Root causes for homes can be quite frustrating. Regulatory violations can be created by residents, they can be created by staff people, they can be created by family members, they can be just simply human error. Mistakes do happen. For instance, when the family decides to bring in a medication or an over-the-counter medication and leave it in the resident's room without the home's knowledge, that happens to be the day we're doing an inspection, and we survey that resident's room and we find an unlocked and accessible medication. Well, then that becomes a regulatory violation. Having good systems in place and controls ahead of time can help prevent those regulatory violations. One of the things that we look at for developing a plan of correction or acceptable plan of correction, and the home should do as well, you want to look at the frequency of violation. Is it a repeated violation? Has the home been cited for it before? how serious is the violation? All of our regulations were based on residents' health, safety, and welfare, and to ensure those things. However, certainly an uncovered garbage can lid doesn't really compare to physical abuse of a resident, okay? So you have to look at how serious that regulatory violation is. And what is the potential for that violation to reoccur? Once again, we look at bedside lighting, or what is the potential for people to bring in medications from the outside, things of that nature. Once again, having systems in place is very important. And if you're cited for violations, regulatory violations, if you don't have systems in place, now it's time to look at putting those types of systems in place and including that information in your plan of correction. When we look at plans of correction, the more severe a violation is, or the more high potential it is for it to reoccur, or if it's a repeated violation, those plans of correction will need to be more lengthy and more detailed and include more steps, especially with monitoring or putting systems in place. As I mentioned before, we have 500 regulations, and each time a regulation is cited, it is different in every single home. Even if one legal entity owns multiple homes, the same violation can be cited in 2 of those homes. However, the circumstances are always a little bit different. When you're addressing a plan of correction, it should be very specific to your home to come up with that corrective action. So when we look at plans of correction, I have seen plans of correction that are as simple as a line that just says fix this, which is certainly not acceptable, to very lengthy plans of correction for a regulatory violation that only occurred once, isn't serious, and is not likely to reoccur. So you should all take those things into consideration when developing your plan of correction. I have seen a provider that actually had received a few violations, not many. Our average is, I think, 9.4 per renewal inspection at this time. Had less than that, and had gone onto our website and actually looked up plans of correction that I had approved in the past and mimicked those word for word, those plans of correction. When I called that provider and said, "Are you following all these steps?" And the provider said, "I most certainly am." And I didn't need to amend or do anything with that plan of correction. And the provider did, in fact, send me the documentation that showed evidence that they were following that plan of correction. Certainly, you can look at other regulatory violations on our website and look at those plans of corrections to get some ideas. But once again, you want to make them specific to your home and your specific situation. It's always best to call the supervisor and speak to them. We will not tell you specifically what to write in your plan of correction. However, we can give you ideas in developing an acceptable plan of correction. The first thing you should address in any of the plan of correction is a plan to correct the regulatory violation cited immediately. For instance, if there was a garbage can lid in a kitchen that wasn't on and it wasn't in use and there was no one around and there was garbage in the can, you can indicate in your plan of correction at the time of inspection the lid was placed on top of the garbage can. If there are other regulatory violations that can't be immediately fixed, which does occur at times, then you want to put when you're going to correct it or when you did correct it, and as far as the date and then the specific action to correct the violation. You want to include a plan to prevent future occurrences, and that can be a policy and procedural change. That can be a systematic change based on your staff or something that occurred. That could be information that you're going to disseminate to families for, once again, like bringing in medications and leaving them unlocked and unattended in resident rooms. You also want to indicate who is going to be responsible to complete each step in that plan of correction. Once again, please do not use any names, use titles. And if you're going to have multiple steps in your plan of correction, you want to indicate dates that each one of those items is going to be corrected or each one of those steps is going to be completed, such as training. Once again, training is very important. for these regulations, especially for your staff, to understand why the regulation is important, and it kind of gives them a reminder to prevent it from reoccurring again. So, for instance, if you make a policy and procedural change, you certainly want to educate all the appropriate staff on the policy and procedural change, but you also want to educate them on the regulation and the foundation for that regulation to prevent it from reoccurring. When we look at changes in practice, once again, that's a policy and procedural change or a systematic change in your home. Once again, maybe doing narcotic counts or something of that nature. When we talk about monitoring for plans of correction, monitoring should be measurable. And what that means is who is going to do what and how frequently. So in other words, the administrator will check the exterior of the home monthly to ensure there are no hazards present. When we talk about that monitoring, you can use some of the language in section 1 of that specific page. So you can put who is going to do what and what they're going to do. They're going to check to ensure whatever that specific regulation indicates. So you can use and change a little bit of that wording to help you out if you're looking to kind of try and figure out what to write in there. And then we want to see something as how frequently it's going to be done, whether it's going to be daily, weekly, monthly. Now, that frequency is also going to depend on whether it's a repeated violation or not. So if you've had that violation occur previously and you submitted that plan of correction, your previous plan of correction didn't work to prevent that violation from reoccurring. Now, certainly you can use that previous plan of correction as somewhat of a template. However, you'll need to step that up a little bit. You'll need to increase your frequency of monitoring, maybe do re-education of that staff, maybe look at, if we haven't made a policy and procedural change, now it's time to make that policy and procedural change. You
John,
can look at, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when you mentioned earlier on the issue of training as a training violation, all these factors hit very well on the issue of a training violation, because oftentimes it's not just simply saying we're going to retrain people. I see that quite a lot. But many times, if there was a violation that occurred as a product of training or the lack thereof, you have to look at your teaching skills. You know, what methods are you using to retrain individuals so that they don't repeat these things? And like you said, the target dates are critical because of the fact that, like, training isn't always done at the same time. It may be done different times, both for orientation and then ongoing training for different people. And then the ongoing monitoring is also critical to ensure that things that are retrained stay that way. And there certainly are things like putting the lid on a garbage can that, you know, you presume once you've done it, you've done it. But some of the other, I just wanted to add to that with what John was saying, because like training is critical, and we see that quite a bit, and that touches on all these factors.
Thank you, Dale. One of those things, like I said, when we were working into that monitoring, there are times where I see monitoring that says, you know, the administrator will monitor to make sure this doesn't reoccur. It still has to have the frequency or how frequently the administrator, designee, or a designated staff person is going to do that. Now, when you indicate monitoring in your plan of correction, monitoring doesn't have to be forever. You can indicate that your monitoring is going to be for a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, or you're going to do monitoring, you know, daily for 3 months and then, you know, weekly for 3 months after that. When you're taking that into consideration about your monitoring, once again, monitoring is important to make sure that you can meet that monitoring need. So if you say that you're going to monitor something daily, you want to make sure you can do that. Now, if we're talking about a reoccurring violation or a repeated violation, you may want to indicate their documentation of monitoring. There is a lot of things that we see documentation of, such as refrigerator or freezer temperatures, physical site type things, where whoever's checking it will sign off on it. They're checking it and record whatever they're doing. And that's perfectly acceptable in a plan of correction, and we like to see those types of things. However, once again, it doesn't have to go forever, but the administrator or the administrator's designee should check to make sure that that monitoring is occurring. You don't want to say that you're doing it in your plan of correction and say that you're going to document it. However, 3 weeks later, you go to check and it hasn't been signed off for 2 weeks, or those temperatures aren't indicated. The monitoring should be reasonable, and once again, you might want to talk to the supervisor about that based on, once again, the serious nature of it, how many actual violations occurred at this specific time under that regulation, or whether it's a repeated violation. If there's any questions, call and ask. I can't say how much that communication is between providers and the department. It is crucial. It's very important. And we're always available. So please take advantage of that, because we would rather help you and prevent you from these violations from occurring as opposed to citing the violations. Once again, the regulatory compliance ensures the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. It's our job to measure that. We want to make sure that the health, safety, and welfare of the residents is always being met, that proper care is being provided to residents, as I'm sure all of the providers do as well. So that's very important. Once again, looking at the quality assurance aspect of it, when we go through, every home's required to do under Regulation 2626 is required to do a quality management plan and a quality manager review. One of those sections under 2626B indicates regulatory violations have to be reviewed at that time. During that review, you want to take a look at any regulatory violations that have been issued in your time frame of your quality management there, whether it be a year, some homes do it every 3 months, 6 months, whatever it happens to be. You want to look at those plans of correction and make sure you're following the plan of corrections and make sure those regulations are still in compliance. You want to have that system of checks and balances to ensure that compliance is being met at all times. You want to make sure that individuals responsible for items either in a plan of correction or to maintain that regulatory compliance, you want to make sure that's being done. If there's any documentation that you've indicated in your plans of correction, you want to make sure that that documentation is being done. When you're putting systems in place to prevent regulations, it's crucial. It's very important. You want to prevent violations from occurring. That way, that ensures the health, safety, and welfare of those residents. We have some specific items here. Our first one is Regulation 2600-132D for fire drills. For residents shall be able to evacuate the entire building to a public thoroughfare or fire safe area designated in writing within the past year by the fire safety expert. Now, I'm not reading that verbatim, but that's the essence of the regulations. Additionally, you have to have 2 unannounced fire drills a year during sleeping hours. You have to have a fire drill observed by a fire safety expert. When we look at these types of violations under 132, this regulation can be cited in a couple different ways. One, under 132D, the residents have to evacuate to a public thoroughfare or fire safe area. That means the residents have to evacuate their rooms and go to the exterior of the building or to a designated fire safe area specified by a fire safety expert. One way that this violation occurs is that not all the residents evacuate at the time of a fire drill, whether it's to that public thoroughfare, the outside of the building, or to that designated fire safe area. The other way that this violation is cited is that the residents don't evacuate within the time specified by the fire safety expert. That violation can occur by a resident refusing to evacuate, or the residents aren't able to evacuate within that time frame. There aren't enough staff to assist residents that require a one-person or two-person assist in order to meet that specific time frame. And we are seeing that more frequently because resident care needs are growing. And as residents age in our facilities, their mobility lessens, their cognitive skills decrease a little bit. And it's very important, and I highly recommend that administrators don't actually participate in fire drills, but observe the fire drills to make sure the staff are doing what they're supposed to be doing and observing residents that may have a decline in either mobility or cognitive functioning. So if this violation is cited, there are several things that you can do. If you have an unsuccessful fire drill, let's say, it is required to be documented in your fire drill record, and it is a potential violation. However, you could increase the number of your fire drills. You could increase the observations from your fire safety expert. A good way to really assess your fire drill capabilities and the abilities for residents to evacuate is to simulate a nighttime drill. So during the daytime, you have all the residents go back to their rooms and at the very least are sitting on their beds, and you take the minimum number of staff that you have scheduled on that evening shift and conduct a fire drill. Now, if you've exceeded your fire drill evacuation time or all the residents haven't evacuated, you can use all those steps in your plan of correction. However, there are some steps here listed on our next slide. And these steps come from an amended plan of correction from the department that we have indicated. In fact, that I have written these for a plan of correction several times for homes. One is conduct 2 fire drills a month until the home can meet the safe evacuation time specified by the fire safety expert for 3 consecutive months. The other is to add additional staff to ensure that those residents can be evacuated. Once again, if you have 20 residents that have no mobility needs and no cognitive functioning issues, then they should be able to evacuate rather quickly. However, now, if half or more than half of those residents require the assistance of 1 or 2 staff people to evacuate, whether it's for a physical mobility issue or for a cognitive issue, you're going to need to add additional staff. Another way is to relocate residents with special assistance needs, either physically or cognitively, closer to those fire safe areas, or to the outside if you're evacuating to the outside. So those are just some steps that you'll see in plans of correction for 132D. Like I said, the slide that you should be looking at now on page 21 indicates steps that we have added to plans of correction to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. The next one we're going to take a look at is 2600-187D for following the directions of the prescriber. This has a wide range of regulatory situations that can occur. It can occur by not administering a medication or forgetting to. It can happen by administering the wrong medication. It can happen by not administering the medication within the correct time frame. It can also be for not providing care prescribed by a physician as well. So there's a lot of things that encompasses, and every single situation and every violation that's written under that regulation is specific to each individual home. It is never the same for two different homes. So some of those plan of corrections can indicate within 60 days, employee or designated staff member who is an LPN or RN to manage medication administration. The staff person must be on site and engaged exclusively in medication management and training a minimum of 20 hours per week for at least 1 year. The other section, as you can see here, administrator qualified designee will observe each medication technician administer medications at least weekly for 2 months to ensure prescriber's orders are followed. That includes the documentation as well. We're seeing more and more with homes when we're doing an inspection and we find multiple medication errors. This will need to be in a plan of correction, that someone who is qualified to administer medications or who is an RN or LPN do some, or if there's no one of that nature, an outside medication trainer come in and do observations of the staff administering medication to ensure it's done correctly. So that's one thing to consider with this 187D, that it is crucial. It's very important. Obviously, some of these medication errors can create harm or death to some of these residents. Unfortunately, we have had that occur. In fact, in my own region, where a medication error has resulted in the death of a resident. So this is a very serious regulation, and you should take the plan of correction very seriously. It should include multiple steps, including retraining staff, requalifying staff, monitoring of medication administration, potential systematic changes in your medication administration practices. It could be that you have too many residents receiving too many medications and there aren't enough staff on duty to administer those medications timely. If that's the case, you'll need to add staff at those times to ensure those medications are being administered timely. So those are all things that you can put in your plan of correction. Additionally, we'll go on here to Regulation 2642, which deals with resident rights. And specifically Regulation 2642B for neglect, intimidation, physical or verbal abuse, mistreatment, or corporal punishment or discipline in any way. Typically, if we have cited this regulatory violation and there is a specific perpetrator involved, the home is obviously required to suspend that person or put them on a plan of supervision that is approved by us. And that can be put in the plan of correction as well, that was done. If the staff person hasn't been terminated, maybe this was a single occurrence, it happens, staff are overworked, whatever happens, and the home wishes to keep this person their employee, then what we want to look at is specific training for that person outside from an outside source. You can certainly reach out and look at the administrator training program where there is specific training to assist with these things. You can look at outside training sources such as counseling or other help with that specific employee. I would highly recommend that you talk to a supervisor about this plan of correction if you intend to keep this person employed at your home and there was founded abuse. We want to see very specific items and very specific things in it relating to that person's training, as well as training for all the staff from an outside source such as the Area Agency on Aging on resident rights, abuse prevention and reporting as well. We would also want to see some type of monitoring for the staff person one-to-one at some rate. And once again, it all depends on the specific situation as well. That will dictate the frequency of that type of monitoring working with the residents. You can see some other recommended things here regarding training, as well as the last section here, which I have indicated in many of my plans of correction relating to both Regulation 2642B or 42C for dignity and respect, where the administrator or someone of responsibility of the home is going to interview the residents privately to ensure that those residents aren't neglected, intimidated, physically or verbally abused or mistreated. And those would require to be documented, those interviews with those residents. So those are things, Michelle, thank you for putting these in this PowerPoint, because these are very good ideas to put in these plans of correction for these types of violations. Once again, when you get your letter from us, you'll get a copy of the licensing inspection summary. Unfortunately, if you do not submit a plan of correction, you typically will get a phone call from us. We try and do that. But if we don't get that plan of correction, you will get another letter from us that says that, A, we haven't received it and you're going to have to give it to us in 2 days. Or if it's an unacceptable plan of correction, we're going to send you that letter, tell you what is unacceptable in it, and give you 2 days to return it. And that's 2 days from the mailing date or the fax date that we give it to you. So these are very important. The plans of correction are crucial in the licensing process, And once again, failure to submit an acceptable plan of correction can result in a licensing action. We don't like to see that happen. We like to work with providers. Certainly, if you're on vacation, a plan of correction came on the first day you left for vacation and it's overdue now when you get back, we want a telephone call from you saying, hey, look, here's the circumstances. Or if something's happened and you can't submit that plan of correction within a time frame specified in the letter, call us, talk to us. Because if you don't communicate with us, you're going to get the nasty letter from us. Once again, we prefer that not to happen. With the plan of correction, just a quick summary. When you're writing a plan of correction, the first thing it should address is how you've corrected the specific violations that are cited. 2, is there a policy procedural change needed? And that's one thing that you'll have to assess. Not all the regulatory violations require a policy procedural change. 3, training. Training on a policy, procedural, or systematic change, and training on the regulatory regulation itself to prevent it from reoccurring. And lastly, some type of monitoring. And we want measurable monitoring. Who's going to do what and how frequently? All of those items need to be in that monitoring, or else we just can't accept it. We're not allowed. And, you know, it's going to end up in a phone call from us or a letter from us saying it's unacceptable. Once your plan of correction is submitted to the department, it will be forwarded over to the supervisor. Whether it's mailed in or faxed in, it will get to the supervisor. The supervisor will review that plan of correction to make sure all the required components are in it. Once again, we take into account the regulatory violation and the seriousness of it, how many violations are cited under that specific regulation, and whether or not it's a repeated violation, to assess that plan of correction to see if it's acceptable or not. We will look at the documentation or evidence of compliance that you sent. Once again, whether that's the corrected document, a photograph, a receipt, something from an outside agency, training document, sign-off sheet that says training was completed. If you're doing training, you should document it and have all of the appropriate staff that are receiving the training sign off that they've received that specific training. You may get a phone call from the supervisor asking for additional information, such as maybe other newly completed medical evaluations if you were cited for one of those being incomplete. We might want to see the next couple that you did just recently just to make sure that they were completed in their entirety. You may see us ask for additional information or pictures or things of that nature. That does frequently happen. So when you're looking at your plan of correction and you're going to submit it to us, take a look at your plan of correction and see what information you need to send to us to demonstrate compliance with that regulation. Based on the number of violations and the serious nature of the violations and the current licensing status of the home, we may have to do an on-site plan of correction verification. Those do happen. Remember, you're required to be in compliance with all of the regulations at all times. So if we do come on site, we will measure compliance with all of the violations that were cited. But we will, if we do witness another regulatory violation, that regulation will be cited as well, in addition to any others that were not corrected. Once that plan of correction verification process is done, the licensing supervisor makes the determination at the bottom of that page of the status of that plan of correction and the home's action, which includes fully implemented, partially implemented with adequate progress, partially implemented with inadequate progress, or not implemented. Certainly, the best factor for a home would be to be either fully implemented or partially implemented with adequate progress. Partially implemented with inadequate progress or not implemented can result in a regulatory enforcement action. Once that plan of correction is approved and those determinations are made, all of that licensing information is sent to our headquarters office. Our headquarters office is the only place that licensing decisions are made, whether it is our director the secretary or deputy secretary of the department. They have the authority to make licensing decisions. No one in our regional offices has that authority, and we do not make those decisions. And once again, the compliance with all the regulations must be maintained at all times. And we all know how difficult that is with, like I said, all those factors with residents, family members, staff people, etc. Michelle, do we have any questions that we have come in?
Yeah, we actually have a few here, John, and this is one that you touched on earlier, but if you could kind of expand on this. When would we expect to receive the letter and the license inspection summary after the inspection is completed?
Certainly. Well, we try and get our licensing inspection summaries out as quick as we can. One of the things that we do have, each region has so many licensing representatives, and we have so many inspections that we're required to complete annually. In addition to that, we have complaints that come in from numerous sources, as well as some of the incident reports that are faxed into us that we are required to investigate. That tends to literally play havoc with our scheduling. What has to happen for a licensing representative, the lead licensing representative, they have to actually get back into the regional office, go through all of the information from your inspection, whether it was a renewal inspection, a complaint, or an incident, or maybe a mixture of those together. Go through all that information and type into our program all of that information. Once that's done, that information goes to the supervisor. Our supervisors supervise anywhere from 8 to 4 licensing staff. So the supervisor gets numerous licensing inspection summaries at one time. So it takes time to review those. Shorter licensing inspection summaries go faster. Lengthier ones, it takes longer to review those. And especially when there's a regulatory violation that's very detailed, such as 42B or the 187D, or one of the serious regulatory violations we are now commonly seeing is 85A for sharing of glucometers. Those are very technical violations, and it takes us time to go through to make sure all of the facts are accurate. So it does take us time to get through that. Homes can receive licensing inspection summaries within 2 weeks. Sometimes, unfortunately, it does take longer just based on our workload. There are numerous complaints and incidents that come into our offices. I forget the specific numbers, but literally thousands every year of each. And we are required to investigate many of those things. We try to do our best to get those to you as soon as possible. If you haven't received it within a time frame that you think is acceptable, what you want to do is you want to call a supervisor and ask them if it's been sent. There are times that the licensing inspection summary is sent to the legal entity address, which is not specifically the personal care home. So it will go to the legal entity address or the corporate office. And it takes time to get from the corporate office to the specific administrator of the home. If you wish to receive, in addition, that licensing inspection summary is always sent to that legal entity address. If you would like a copy of that as well at the same time it is sent out to the legal entity, you can ask the licensing representatives to take your information and make sure a copy gets sent to your home specifically. But we will try and get those to you as soon as possible. We have had some situations where it's been a lengthy time in getting the licensing inspection summaries out. That is just based on our workload. We do our best at it, and we will continue to do that. But if you do have questions, please call the licensing supervisor for the lead inspector for your specific inspection, and they will give you an idea of the current status of it.
Okay, we just got another one. That's a good question. How far back do the surveyors look for repeat violations?
Good. Our policy, we will go back to the last renewal inspection, which would encompass any incident and complaint licensing inspection summaries, and go back for a total of at least 1 year. okay? So it's at least 12 months, which would encompass any of those licensing inspection summaries, whether it's a renewal, an incident, or complaint investigation. So at least 1 year. And if that licensing inspection summary is further back from the last renewal inspection, we will go back to that last renewal inspection.
One question that continues to come up periodically has to do with just the recorded webinars. And again, you only receive CEUs if you're on the webinar today. You would receive 1.5 for the entire webinar. You won't receive a certificate, but we do maintain an electronic log of who was on, so our inspectors would know that when they come out and they check your CEU records. As far as watching or looking at the recorded webinars, again, they are, as Michelle said earlier, posted on our website so that you can go there and check them out as often as you wish. And in fact, several providers have indicated that they've had other staff look at them at a later point.
There was a question about how to find it, how to find the recorded webinars, which I went over at the beginning of this webinar. If you just go to our website and go under General Information, and under that is General Training Information, the webinars are there. They're linked right there from YouTube on our website. The information, the directions to find them is earlier in the PowerPoint, which is attached to the webinar today.
Just a couple last things I'd like to cover. Just to reiterate, please make sure that you sign and date each page of the licensing inspection summary that you receive in the mail. And if you're adding additional pages that include your plan of correction, please sign and date those pages as well. And I can't say how important it is for providers to communicate with the licensing supervisors through the inspection process, whether it happens to be a renewal inspection, a complaint investigation, or an incident investigation. If there are violations being cited or any questions, it is very important to communicate with that supervisor. We don't want you to have unanswered questions. You know, we always have our operator support hotline available, but if you're looking at specific inspections under any of those three categories, it is best to talk to that supervisor to help you through that process and the plan of correction.
Yeah, and John, that's a really good point. On the operator support hotline, I certainly don't mind people calling and asking questions about the licensing or plan of correction process, but when they have specific questions regarding a specific violation, I typically like to refer them back to the inspectors that were out to actually do their inspection. I know that the process of an inspection can be very stressful, but I would just emphasize that don't let your inspectors get out the door before you get their names and phone numbers. They should be providing that, but sometimes I've had numerous people that have basically said, I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't remember it, or I can't find it, and I don't remember who it was. I'll certainly help you figure that out, but always ask them those questions before they leave your building.
Okay, I have another question here. Must the legal entity sign the plan of correction? It's difficult to accomplish in a timely manner for facilities that are part of a multi-owned corporation.
The answer to that is no. Any representative of the legal entity, which could be the administrator, even the administrator designee, can sign the plan of correction. It's not required that the corporate entity sign the plan of correction. There's many times where the administrator will sign and date the plan of correction. There's other times where the assistant administrator or director of wellness or whatever title that person happens to have will sign that plan of correction as well. That is perfectly acceptable as long as it is someone within that legal entity's employee.
Okay, and the next question, at the time of exit counseling, when you have questions and the inspector won't explain or answer the question, I guess when they're wondering what the next step would be, which I would imagine would be to speak with their supervisor.
Yes, you should always, if there's questions or unanswered questions, and there are times where inspectors will look at something and say, this is a potential violation, however, I need to talk to my supervisor about it. And that does happen, where we take a look at it and make a determination. The reality is the licensing inspector themselves do not make the determination of whether something is or is not going to be cited as a violation. That's why they address it as a potential violation. That authority rests with the supervisor that makes the final decisions. In any case such as that, you want to contact that person's supervisor. Some people think that is a negative thing that you're calling this person's supervisor. It is not. We welcome all of those phone calls. We welcome all of the questions. If you have a dispute with a regulatory violation or potential regulatory violation, we want you to call. Once again, we do not want to issue a regulatory violation or a citation for something that is not a violation. It takes your time, it takes our time, it's not fair to you. We don't want to do things like that. We want to hear your voice, we want to hear what you have to say. Please express it to the supervisor.
Okay, and I've had a couple people bring up that the fire safety expert has to observe a drill annually, not quarterly, and they're wondering if it's a mistake in the PowerPoint. But what I think they're referring to is an example of a plan of correction step that we listed. It's not the requirement to have a quarterly observed fire drill. It was just a suggestion for a plan of correction step. So
that is correct. That was an example for a plan of correction if Regulation 2600-132D was cited. And that specific item in a plan of correction would be something there where 132D was cited as a repeated violation or there were multiple violations cited for that under one regulation at that time. So once again, that was just an example on that page. Everything on that page was an example of things that you can put in a plan of correction.
Right. And another question, they're wondering if they can go to the website and print the PowerPoint. But the PowerPoint is attached to the webinar today. It's one of the documents that's available in addition to the example of the LIS page. So if you can't get it there, just let Dale know, and he'll send you a copy. And is it feasible for 2 or more PC certified people to receive CEUs when participating on the same webinar? And yes, just please document on your training record how that transpired. Another question, if the slides can be emailed or downloaded, they're attached to the webinar, but if you need us to email them to you, we will. Okay. And then, during a survey, how far back can a surveyor look? It depends on the regulation they're looking at, I would say.
Oh, yeah, when we're measuring compliance with the regulation, some of the regulations can go back to when an employee was hired, such as a criminal history background check. Sometimes we have to look back at least a year to say we're looking for compliance with having a sleeping hour fire drill every 6 months. Well, we may have to go back a year and a half just to make sure within that year that we're measuring compliance with that it occurred at least every 6 months. It all depends on the specific regulatory item that we're measuring compliance with. Sometimes we have to go back and look at assessments and support plans of when that last one was done to make sure the next one was done within its time frame. So it would depend on the regulatory section that we're measuring compliance with.
Okay. Here's one that's relevant. If a checklist or sign-off sheet was created as a way of monitoring compliance and no specific time frame for continued documentation was established, how long must the form or checklist be used?
Well, that would need to be specified in your plan of correction of whether or not, once again, based on the seriousness, the number of violations cited at the time, whether or not you're going to use a checklist as part of your plan of correction and for how long you're going to do that. It might be acceptable, such as the monitoring, to maybe do the checklist for a month if you're doing like freezer or refrigerator temperatures for a month, and then daily for a month, and then weekly for another month, and then monthly after that. You would have to specify that in the plan of correction. And once again, each one of those regulatory violations would be different, as well as the plan of correction. And it would depend on, once again, the seriousness of the regulation being cited, how many violations under that specific regulation at the time are in that specific licensing inspection summary, and whether or not it's a repeated violation. So once again, that would depend on each specific home and each specific circumstances. But you could, once again, talk to the supervisor about those time frames related to both monitoring and documentation of that.
Okay, and someone is asking if they can get certificates for the CEUs for the presentations. And we're not issuing certificates, but you can use this as, towards your administrator training and just document it according to the regulations on your training record. You have some more, Dale? Okay, someone is looking for contact information to obtain the slides, and the information on the screen is what you would want to use. Just email, that will go directly to Dale, and he can send you the PowerPoint slides. That's the operator support hotline and the operator support hotline email address. Okay. I think that concludes the questions that I have here that are relevant to the topic.
Okay.
I think we're finished.
Well, I'd like to thank the providers for listening in. Hopefully we provided you with some information that is helpful in developing these plans of correction and giving you some resources to help you through that process, especially newer administrators that are completing plans of correction that haven't done them before. And I've come across that. Please use us as a resource to help you in any of the licensing process. Whether you have a question about a regulation, we want to answer those questions for you before we're even on site to do an inspection or an investigation. If you have regulatory violations that are cited and you have questions, please ask the licensing representatives. Please call the supervisor. Like I said, it's important for us to be a resource to the providers that are out there.
Okay, and I just want to mention also, if you asked a question that was not answered, we're going to answer that directly to you. And I just got another question that is relevant here. Is this webinar considered online? And will it have to be counted towards the 12 hours of online, or is it 12 hours of in-person? But my opinion on that is that if it's interactive webinar and you're on it live, we consider it an in-person training. If you're watching a webinar later or taking an online training, watching a recorded webinar, then it would not be. It would just be online training. Okay. So that concludes the webinar today. We almost went an hour and a half. We're just ending 10 minutes short. If you have any additional follow-up questions, please contact the operator support hotline, or if you, in the future you have any training topic suggestions that you feel that would benefit the providers, just please feel free to contact the operator support hotline and let us know. Thank you very much.